The sound of the front door slamming shut was like a gunshot in the pouring rain, each drop that hit the cold pavement a tiny echo of his final words. "A baby now. You're trying to trap me, Celestine. I'm destined for more than this. More than you." He'd spat the words with a venom that chilled her more than the November wind whipping through her thin cardigan. Standing on the cracked stoop of their tiny apartment, with nothing but a worn handbag and the earth-shattering secret of her pregnancy, she watched his car's taillights disappear into the black, rain-slicked night. He thought he was leaving behind a poor, helpless waitress. He had no idea he was abandoning an heiress, and in that moment, as the cold seeped into her bones, the heartbroken woman began to fade, replaced by the calculating mind of Celestine Duval. He wanted more. He was about to lose everything. Life for Celestine had been a deliberate choice. It was an experiment in normalcy, a rebellion against the gilded cage she had been born into. The name Duval carried the weight of old money, of sprawling estates, and whispered conversations in boardrooms that decided the fate of corporations. But Celestine wanted none of it. She wanted to be loved for herself, not for the trust fund that bore her name. So she had left. She'd changed her last name to a simple Graham, rented a small apartment on the industrial side of Westport, and found a job waiting tables at the corner bistro, a cozy place with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh coffee. It was there she met Michael Peterson. He was charming, with an easy smile and eyes that held a universe of ambition. He was a junior project manager at a mid-tier real estate firm, and he spoke of blueprints and skyscrapers the way a poet speaks of love. He was captivated by her quiet grace, her genuine kindness, and he assumed her simple, uncomplicated background. To him, she was a blank canvas onto which he could paint his future. Their courtship was a whirlwind of shared dreams, whispered over cheap diner coffee, and long walks in parks they couldn't afford to live near. He spoke of closing huge deals of one day, seeing his name on a building. She spoke of a home filled with laughter, a small garden, and the simple joy of a life built together. They married at the city courthouse 6 months later. Her family, or what was left of it, her stern, powerful grandfather, William Duval, was not informed. This life was hers, built on her own terms. The first year was a struggle, but a happy one. They pooled their meager earnings, celebrating small victories like fixing their rattling second-hand car or affording a night at the movies. Celestine was a master of stretching a dollar, turning their cramped apartment into a warm, inviting home. She supported Michael's ambition, typing up his reports late into the night and listening patiently as he rehearsed his presentations. She believed in him with an unwavering purity that he, in his heart of hearts, knew he didn't deserve. The first crack in their facade appeared in the form of Brenda Scott. Brenda was the daughter of a senior partner at Michael's firm. She was everything Celestine wasn't, loud, impeccably dressed in designer labels, dripping with an casual arrogance that came from a lifetime of privilege. Michael started mentioning her name more and more often. Brenda thinks I should pitch the Riverside project directly to her father. Brenda invited me for drinks with some influential developers. Celestine felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. She noticed Michael becoming more critical of their life. The apartment he once called cozy was now cramped. Her carefully budgeted meals were boring. He started staying out late for networking, coming home smelling of expensive perfume and single malt scotch. He was changing, morphing into a man she didn't recognize, a man who looked at her not with love, but with a faint, dismissive pity. Then came the 2 blue lines on a plastic stick. Celestine's first feeling was pure, unadulterated joy. A baby. A tiny piece of them, a symbol of their love that would make their small home feel like a palace. She imagined telling Michael, pictured his face, lighting up the two of them, planning and dreaming for this new life. She waited for him to get home, her heart thrumming with nervous excitement, a special dinner she could barely afford simmering on the stove. He walked in late, his tie loosened a look of agitated triumph on his face. He didn't even notice the aroma of his favorite roast. "You will not believe the day I had—" He began, tossing his briefcase onto a chair. "Brenda introduced me to Robert Finch, himself. The Robert Finch. He's looking for a hungry young executive for his new international division. This is it, Kat. This is the opportunity I've been waiting for." "Michael, that's wonderful," she said, her own news feeling suddenly small and inconvenient. "I have some news, too. Something amazing." He barely heard her, already pouring himself a drink. "This changes everything. No more scrimping. No more living in this dump. Finch's people live in the Heights. They drive German cars. Their wives sit on charity boards. They have connections. The unspoken words, they don't wait. Tables hung in the air between them, thick and suffocating. Taking a deep breath, she decided to forge ahead. "Michael, I'm pregnant." The words dropped into the room like a stone in a silent pond. The ambitious energy drained from his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. He stared at her, then at her stomach, as if she had just confessed to a terrible crime. "Pregnant." He whispered the word laced with disgust. "You can't be." "I am," she said, her voice trembling. "We're going to have a baby." "No, you're going to have a baby." He snarled, his face contorting into a mask of rage. "I'm on the verge of breaking through, of finally getting the life I deserve, and you pull this, you're trying to trap me. A baby now. It's an anchor, Celestine. A dead weight. We can't afford it." "We'll manage," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "We always do. It will be a good thing, Michael, a blessing. A blessing." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that scraped at her soul. "It's a curse Finch isn't going to mentor a guy with a screaming baby and a broke wife. Brenda, her life is what I want. Parties travel influence, not dirty diapers and formula payments." The mention of Brenda's name was the final devastating blow. It laid everything bare. He wasn't just rejecting their child. He was rejecting her their entire life together in favor of a shallow, glittering prize. "So that's it," she choked out, the reality crashing down on her. "You're just going to throw us away. There is no us anymore," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "I'm going to stay at a friend's place. I need to think." But she knew he wasn't going to a friend's. He was going to Brenda. The next few days were a blur of unanswered calls and texts. Finally, a week later, he returned. Not to reconcile, but to pack. He moved with a cold, detached efficiency, throwing his clothes into a suitcase. He didn't look at her. "Michael, please," she begged one last time, her hand on her still flat stomach. "Don't do this to us, to our child." He finally turned to face her, and his eyes were those of a stranger. There was no love, no regret, only irritation. "I spoke to Brenda's father's lawyer," he said flatly. "He's drawing up divorce papers. He said it's a clean break. We have no assets, so there's nothing to divide." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few crumpled bills, $200, and threw them on the table. "This should cover you for a bit. It's all I have." It was the ultimate insult, the final, cruel dismissal of their life together. And then came the words that would ignite the fire of her revenge. "Look, Celestine, you're a sweet girl, but you're not meant for the world I'm heading into. This is for the best. You'll find some other simple guy, and you can have your simple life. I'm destined for more than this. More than you. He picked up his suitcase and walked to the door. It had started to rain, a miserable grey drizzle that matched the colour of her world. Goodbye, Celestine. The door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the tiny apartment, the final punctuation mark on her shattered dreams. She stood motionless for a long time, the $200 on the table mocking her. The rain outside turned into a downpour. She walked to the window and watched as his car, a newer model she didn't recognize, pulled away from the curb and disappeared. The tears finally came hot and furious. But beneath the grief, a different feeling was taking root, a cold, hard resolve. He thought she was poor, weak, and simple. He thought he could discard her and their unborn child like trash on his climb to the top. He had no idea who she really was. He had no conception of the power she could wield. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. In the desolate silence of her empty apartment, Celestine Graham died, and Celestine Duval, heiress to $1 billion fortune, began to plot her return. For 3 days, Celestine remained in the apartment, a ghost haunting the ruins of her life. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the drip of the leaky faucet and the mournful sound of the rain against the window pane. She didn't eat. She barely slept. Grief was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Every object in the small space was a painful reminder. The coffee mug he used every morning, the worn armchair where he'd sit and read the photograph on the nightstand of their wedding day, their faces alight with a hope that now seemed like a cruel joke. On the 4th day, the morning sickness hit with a vengeance. Kneeling on the cold linoleum of the bathroom floor, utterly alone and miserable, Celestine knew she couldn't stay. This place, once a sanctuary of love, was now a tomb of memories. More importantly, she wasn't just responsible for herself anymore. A tiny new life was depending on her, and that life deserved more than a mother hollowed out by despair. Her fingers trembling, dialed a number she hadn't called in almost 3 years. It was a private line, one that bypassed secretaries and assistants, going straight to the oak-paneled study of the formidable man who ran the Duval empire. It rang once, twice. William Duval. The voice was exactly as she remembered, deep, resonant, and clipped with an authority that commanded entire boardrooms. No hello, just a statement of fact. Grandfather, she whispered, her voice cracking. It's Celestine. There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound she could hear the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the background. When he spoke again, the sharpness in his tone was softened by a sliver of something she hadn't heard in years, concern. Celestine. Where are you? The simple question broke her. The dam of her composure burst and she began to sob incoherent words, tumbling out between gasps. Michael, the divorce, the baby being thrown out. She told him everything, the whole humiliating, heartbreaking story. He listened without interruption. He didn't say, "I told you so," though he had every right. He had warned her that the world outside their rarefied air was often cruel, that a man might be tempted by her spirit, but ultimately unable to resist the siren song of her fortune if he knew of it. Instead, he had allowed her to run her experiment in normalcy, and now it had failed spectacularly. When she finally fell silent, her breath hitching, he spoke with quiet, steely resolve. Jonathan will be there in 3 hours. He'll have a car waiting. Pack what you need. You're coming home. Jonathan Cole was the Duval family's chief legal counsel and William's most trusted confidant. He was a man in his late 50s, with kind eyes, a razor-sharp mind, and an unwavering loyalty to the family he had served for 3 decades. When he arrived at her apartment, his expression was a mask of professional calm, but his eyes held a deep sympathy, as he took in the shabby surroundings and Celestina's pale, tear-streaked face. He didn't pry or ask questions. He simply managed everything. He arranged for a moving company to pack and store her belongings. He dealt with the landlord settling the lease. He gently guided a numb Celestine into the back of a black, discreet sedan with tinted windows. As the car pulled away from the curb, she took one last look at the building at the window of the life she had tried to build and felt a profound sense of loss, but also for the first time in days, a flicker of safety. The journey to the Duval estate was like traveling between different worlds. They left the grey industrial landscape of the city behind, driving through rolling hills and pristine countryside until they reached a set of imposing wrought-iron gates. The gates swung open silently, and the car proceeded down a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. The mansion rose before them, a symphony of stone and glass that looked both timeless and modern. It was the house she grew up in, a place she had once felt suffocated by, but now represented an unbreachable fortress. Her grandfather was waiting for her in the grand entrance hall. William Duval was tall and silver-haired, still imposing in his late 70s. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, his posture ramrod straight. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her simple clothes and the exhaustion etched on her face. For a moment, she feared his disapproval, his reprimand. Instead, he simply opened his arms. Celestine fell into them, and for the first time since she was a little girl, she let her grandfather hold her, his strength a solid, reassuring anchor in the storm of her life. "Welcome home, my dear," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. We'll take care of everything." The weeks that followed were a period of quiet healing and slow rebirth. Celestine was given a suite of rooms overlooking the sprawling gardens. The finest doctors were brought in to oversee her pregnancy. A nutritionist planned her meals. The quiet, efficient household staff catered to her every need, creating a cocoon of comfort that allowed her body and soul to begin mending. But it was more than just physical recovery. William and Jonathan began the process of reawakening the part of her she had long suppressed, the Duval mind. They didn't coddle her or treat her like a fragile victim. They treated her like the heiress she was. Meetings were held in the vast library, surrounded by the scent of old leather and wood polish. Jonathan Cole, with meticulous care, walked her through the legalities of the divorce. "Michael Peterson has no idea who you are." Jonathan explained, his tone calm and precise. He filed for a standard no-fault divorce against Celestine Graham, a waitress with no declared assets. We will not contest it. We will let it proceed quietly and quickly. For now, Celestine Graham needs to disappear. And then Celestine asked, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. And then her grandfather interjected, his eyes glinting with a cold fire. "We begin the education of Celestine Duval. You ran from this world once, child. Now you will learn to command it." Her days took on a new structure. Mornings were spent with tutors not in literature or art, but in finance, corporate law, and market analysis. She learned about stock portfolios, hostile takeovers, and leveraged buyouts. She discovered a natural aptitude for numbers and strategy, a part of her brain that had lain dormant during her simple life. Afternoons were spent with her grandfather. He would walk her through the intricate web of Duval Industries, a global conglomerate with interests in technology, real estate, and sustainable energy. He taught her about power, not just the overt kind that came with wealth, but the subtle, more potent kind that came from information, patience, and impeccable timing. "Revenge is not a storm, Celestine," he told her one afternoon, as they stood before a large window overlooking the estate. "A storm is loud, chaotic, and passes quickly. True revenge is like the changing of a season. It is inevitable, patient, and all-encompassing. It changes the entire landscape, and your adversary doesn't realize it's winter until he's frozen solid. 7 months later, Celestine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Liam. Holding her son in her arms for the first time, she felt a love so fierce and protective it took her breath away. Looking down at his perfect tiny face, she made a silent vow. She would build a world for him, where he would never want for anything, a world safe from the likes of men like Michael Peterson. But she would also ensure that the man who had so cruelly discarded them would one day understand the magnitude of what he had thrown away. Liam was not her anchor. He was her purpose. The next 3 years were a blur of intense transformation. While nannies and staff helped care for Liam, allowing Celestine to focus, she was a deeply involved and loving mother. Her evenings and weekends were reserved solely for him, but her days were dedicated to her new role. She was no longer her grandfather's pupil. She was his protégé, his right hand. She shed the last vestiges of the timid waitress. Her simple clothes were replaced by a wardrobe of bespoke power suits and elegant dresses. She learned to command a room with a quiet confidence that was more intimidating than any shout. She wasn't just playing a part, she had fully inhabited the identity she was born to. She was Celestine Duval, Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions for Duval Industries, and she was finally ready to return to Westport. Not as a victim, but as a predator. While Celestine was being reborn in the crucible of corporate power, Michael Peterson's life was exactly what he had dreamed it would be. Or so it appeared on the surface. He married Brenda Scott 6 months after his divorce from Celestine was finalized. It was a lavish affair featured in the society pages, a testament not to love, but to a successful merger of ambition and assets. They bought a sprawling minimalist house in the exclusive neighborhood of Sterling Heights, a glass and steel monstrosity with more windows than warmth. Their life was a carefully curated performance for an audience of their peers. They drove matching silver sports cars, attended all the right charity galas, and vacationed in places designed to be geotagged on social media. Michael had indeed gotten his promotion. With Brenda's father a senior partner at the firm, as his father-in-law, his ascent was swift. He was now a director of development, managing significant projects. He had the title, the salary, and the respect he craved. Yet a strange emptiness gnawed at him. His relationship with Brenda was transactional. Their conversations revolved around stock prices, social engagements, and which rival couple they were outperforming. There was none of the genuine warmth, the easy laughter he had once shared with Celestine. Sometimes late at night, a fleeting image of her kind smile would flicker in his mind, but he would quickly banish it, dismissing it as a relic of a past he had wisely escaped. He never once wondered what became of her or the baby. In his mind, she had simply faded back into the obscurity from which he'd plucked her. Celestine's return to Westport was not announced with a trumpet blast, but with the quiet, seismic tremor of a new corporate player entering the market. A new investment firm, CD Holdings, was incorporated. The name was deliberately anonymous, the CD, a private nod to her identity. The firm's stated purpose was to invest in innovative urban renewal and high-tech commercial real estate, Michael Peterson's exact professional territory. Jonathan Cole acted as the public face of CD Holdings, its seasoned and impeccably discreet CEO. Celestine remained entirely in the shadows, the firm's mysterious, unseen chairperson. From a sleek, state-of-the-art office on the top floor of the city's newest skyscraper, a building her own company now owned, she began to meticulously map out Michael's world. She had her research team compile a complete dossier on him, his career trajectory, his current projects, his professional strengths, and more importantly, his weaknesses. She knew Michael better than anyone. She knew his desperate need for approval from powerful men. She knew his ego was both massive and fragile, and she knew his fatal flaw: he was a gambler who always overestimated his own intelligence. He wasn't a true visionary. He was a salesman who was good at packaging other people's ideas. The first move was subtle. Michael's firm, Scott & Sterling Realty, was the front-runner for the highly coveted Titan Point development project, a massive undertaking to redevelop a derelict industrial waterfront into a luxury mixed-use complex of condos, retail, and office space. It was the project that would make Michael's career, cementing his status as a major player in the city. Just as Scott & Sterling were preparing their final bid, CD Holdings made a stunning, unsolicited offer to the city council. Their proposal was bolder, better funded, and technologically superior. It included plans for a green energy grid, integrated smart city technology, and public art installations. It made the Scott & Sterling bid look provincial and outdated. The city council was flawed. CD Holdings seemingly came out of nowhere, yet they had the financial backing and the vision to blow the established competition out of the water. The Titan Point project was awarded to them unequivocally. The fallout at Scott & Sterling was immediate. Michael's father-in-law was furious. Michael himself was humiliated. He had personally overseen the bid, assuring everyone it was a guaranteed win. At a tense dinner with Brenda and her parents, he was openly berated. "Who the hell are these CD Holdings people?" Brenda's father fumed. "They came out of nowhere and made you look like an amateur Michael." "It's a setback, that's all," Michael said, trying to project a confidence he didn't feel. "They got lucky. I'll find out who they are. I'll beat them on the next one." This was exactly what Celestine had anticipated. She hadn't just taken the project, she had wounded his pride. A wounded, prideful man makes mistakes. A few weeks later, Jonathan Cole, as CEO of CD Holdings, announced a secondary phase of the Titan Point project, the construction of a landmark 50-story corporate headquarters, the Duval Tower. To foster local partnerships, CD Holdings would be subcontracting the management of this specific construction to a reputable local firm. It was a trap baited with the most irresistible lure imaginable, a chance for Michael to get a piece of the very project he had lost. It was an opportunity for him to save face, to prove to his father-in-law that he could play in the big leagues. As expected, Michael scrambled, using every ounce of his influence and his father-in-law's connections to get a meeting with Jonathan Cole. Celestine watched the video feed from a hidden camera in the boardroom, her face impassive. She saw Michael a little heavier now, his smile a little more forced, enter the room and shake Jonathan's hand. He was a sycophant, lavishing praise on CD Holdings' vision, desperate to be a part of it. Jonathan played his role perfectly. He was courteous but aloof, letting Michael do most of the talking. He made it clear that CD Holdings was looking for a partner who was aggressive, forward-thinking, and willing to take calculated risks. Michael, eager to impress, boasted about his past successes and promised to deliver the project under budget and ahead of schedule. He was practically begging. At the end of the meeting, Jonathan leaned back. "We'll consider your firm's proposal, Mr. Peterson. However, our board requires a significant personal commitment from our partners. A sign of good faith. We'd expect the managing firm to take a substantial equity stake in the tower's construction phase. It ensures all parties are fully invested in the success of the project." It was an unusual but not unheard of request. It was also the core of Celestine's trap. Michael saw it as his chance. By investing personally, he'd show CD Holdings he had skin in the game, and the potential return on investment was astronomical. He went back to Brenda, his eyes gleaming with ambition. "This is it," he told her. "This is how we get back on top. We're going to invest in this tower, all of it. We'll leverage our house, use your portfolio. The payout will be legendary." Brenda, blinded by the same greed, readily agreed. They liquidated their assets, took out a second mortgage, and poured every last cent they had, and some they borrowed into securing the partnership for the construction of Duval Tower. The contract was signed. Michael Peterson was now personally and financially tied to Celestine's project. The first phase of her plan was complete. The chess pieces were set. Now she would begin to slowly, methodically squeeze. Her social re-entry was planned with the same strategic precision. She chose the annual Westport Charity Ball, the pinnacle of the city's social calendar, as her debut. It was the one event Michael and Brenda would never miss. Celestine arrived late, making a deliberate entrance. She wore a bespoke gown of emerald green silk that shimmered under the crystal chandeliers. Her hair was styled in an elegant chignon, and around her neck was a simple but breathtaking diamond necklace, the Duval star. She was no longer the soft, unassuming girl who had waited tables. She was a vision of power, wealth, and unattainable grace. A murmur went through the ballroom. "Who is that?" people whispered. She didn't walk. She glided Jonathan Cole at her side, parting the sea of Westport's elite. Michael and Brenda were standing by the champagne fountain, holding court. Michael was mid-laugh, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face, when he saw her. He froze. His glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. It wasn't a sudden recognition. It was a slow, horrifying dawning. He saw a face that was achingly familiar, yet utterly transformed, the same soft curve of her jaw, the same deep brown eyes, but now they held an icy confidence he had never seen. The name Celestine formed in his mind, but his brain refused to connect this goddess of industry with the poor, pathetic wife he had discarded in the rain. It was impossible. Brenda noticed his distraction. "Michael, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Celestine chose that exact moment to turn her head, her eyes meeting Michael's across the crowded room. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She simply held his gaze, her expression a perfect, unreadable blank. And in that chillingly neutral stare, he knew it was her. His blood ran cold. The entire foundation of his world tilted violently on its axis. Celestine, here, looking like that. It made no sense. His past was colliding with his present in a way he could never have imagined. He felt a primal, gut-wrenching fear. This was not a coincidence. She was the ghost at his feast, and he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she had come for him. The weeks following the charity ball were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Celestine never approached Michael directly. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was a constant, unnerving pressure. She was everywhere and nowhere at once. Her name, Celestine Duval, was suddenly on everyone's lips, whispered in awe at the exclusive clubs and high-powered lunch meetings that formed the battleground of Westport's elite. She was the mysterious, brilliant chairperson of CD Holdings, the new queen of the city's real estate scene. Michael was in a state of barely controlled panic. He tried to explain the impossible situation to Brenda, but the words came out as frantic, nonsensical babbling. "She's my ex-wife, the waitress," he insisted one night, pacing their cold white living room like a caged animal. Brenda scoffed, examining her freshly manicured nails. "Michael, don't be ridiculous. Your ex-wife was some mousy little thing named Celestine Graham. This is Celestine Duval, of the Duval Industries Duvals. You're just stressed about the tower project. Perhaps you should see someone." His inability to make her believe him isolated him further. He was trapped in a nightmare only he could see. He would catch glimpses of Celestine at industry events, a brief, chilling eye contact across a boardroom, the scent of her subtle, expensive perfume as she passed him in a hallway. Each encounter was a small, sharp stab of terror. She was a living embodiment of the secret he had buried, now returned as a spectre of immense power. Meanwhile, construction on the Duval Tower began. On the surface, everything was proceeding perfectly. Michael threw himself into the project, working feverishly, hoping that a massive success would somehow appease the ghost he couldn't shake. He held meetings, approved schematics, and gave confident presentations to Jonathan Cole, all while Celestine's invisible presence loomed over him. This was when she began to tighten the screws. The first problem was a shipment of specialized structural steel from a German supplier, a supplier CD Holdings had recommended. The shipment was delayed by weeks due to a sudden customs issue. Michael scrambled his frantic calls to the supplier, met with polite but unhelpful bureaucracy. The delay put the entire project behind schedule, and the penalty clauses in their contract were draconian. Every day of delay cost Michael and Brenda a fortune. Next came the geological survey reports. A CD Holdings independent consultant discovered unforeseen soil instability on a small section of the build site, right where a critical foundation pillar was to be poured. The original surveys which Michael had signed off on had shown no issues. Now major time-consuming and incredibly expensive reinforcement work was required. Michael's budget, already strained, began to hemorrhage money. He confronted Jonathan Cole, his voice tight with accusation. "These problems are coming out of nowhere. The steel supplier you insisted on the soil reports. It feels like sabotage." Jonathan looked at him over the rim of his glasses, his expression one of mild disappointment. "Mr. Peterson, are you suggesting CD Holdings would sabotage its own flagship project? We are a multi-billion-dollar corporation. This tower is a matter of legacy for us. Perhaps the issue isn't sabotage, but a lack of sufficient oversight on your part. Due diligence is, after all, your responsibility." The veiled threat was clear. Any attempt to blame CD Holdings would be framed as his own incompetence. He was trapped. At home, the atmosphere turned toxic. As their financial situation worsened, Brenda's support curdled into relentless criticism. "What do you mean the budget is overrun by 30%? She shrieked, waving a bank statement in his face. "That was my inheritance. You promised me this was a sure thing." "Michael, it's just temporary," he insisted. "Once we get past these initial hurdles, it will be fine." But it wasn't fine. A local investigative journalist, tipped off by an anonymous source from Celestine's team, began publishing a series of articles about potential safety shortcuts and environmental violations at the Duval Tower construction site. The accusations were baseless, cleverly worded allegations and leading questions, but they were enough to trigger a full-scale investigation by the city's Safety Commission. Work on the tower was officially halted. The financial bleed became a torrent. The interest on their loans was piling up. Creditors started calling. The friends they had cultivated in their social circle began to distance themselves, not wanting to be associated with a failing project and a man whose reputation was rapidly disintegrating. Michael was a man on the edge. He was losing his money, his career, and his wife, whose contempt for him was now palpable. He started drinking heavily, his days a blur of panicked phone calls, and his nights a haze of alcohol-fueled despair. Celestine observed his downfall from her serene, top-floor office, watching it unfold on spreadsheets, reports, and covertly recorded phone calls. There was no joy in it for her, only a cold, grim satisfaction. This was not about pleasure. It was about justice. It was about deconstructing, piece by painful piece, the arrogant man who believed he was destined for more. The final public humiliation was meticulously planned. The Westport Financial Gazette was preparing its annual Titans of Industry issue, celebrating the city's most influential business leaders. Michael, before his fall, had been slated for a feature. Celestine, through a strategic PR move, arranged to be the cover story. The magazine hit the newsstands on a Monday morning. There she was on the cover of every copy in the city. Celestine Duval, her expression poised and confident, under the headline, "The Architect of Tomorrow, How Celestine Duval is Reshaping the Westport Skyline." Inside was a glowing 10-page spread detailing her vision, her business acumen, and the incredible success of CD Holdings. And buried deep within the article was a single devastating paragraph. Duval's flagship project, the magnificent Duval Tower, has not been without its challenges. The project, initially subcontracted to local developer Michael Peterson of Scott & Sterling Realty, has been plagued by significant delays and massive budget overruns. Sources close to the project cite a catastrophic failure of management on Peterson's part. CD Holdings has since moved to sever ties with Peterson and his firm, with a spokesperson confirming they will be taking direct control to steer the project back to its original path of excellence. It was a professional execution delivered in cold corporate print. Michael read it in his office, the magazine trembling in his hands. That same morning, an email arrived from Jonathan Cole, formally terminating their contract and initiating legal action to recoup the financial losses incurred due to his gross negligence. Attached was a bill for damages that ran into the tens of millions of dollars, a sum that would not only bankrupt him and Brenda, but would leave them in debt for the rest of their lives. An hour later, his father-in-law summoned him. The older man didn't rage. He was worse. He was coldly dismissive, looking at Michael as if he were a bug. "You're a disgrace, Michael. You've not only ruined yourself, you've tarnished my firm's name. You're fired. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out." As Michael stumbled out of the office, in a daze carrying a cardboard box with his personal effects, he saw his colleagues whispering, avoiding his gaze. They had all seen the magazine. He was no longer a rising star. He was a pariah. When he got home, Brenda was waiting for him, her bags already packed. Her face was a mask of cold fury. "My father called me," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "He told me everything. You didn't just lose our money. You lost it all while chasing the ghost of your pathetic little ex-wife. She played you for a fool, and you were too stupid and arrogant to see it. Our marriage is over. My lawyers will be in touch." She walked past him without a backward glance, leaving him alone in the vast, empty house that the bank would soon be repossessing. The silence was absolute. He was utterly destroyed. He had lost his job, his reputation, his wife, and every penny he had. The glittering world he had betrayed Celestine for had crumbled to dust around him. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very soul, that she had been the architect of it all. He had called her an anchor, a dead weight. But she had been the ground beneath his feet, and now that she was gone, he was in a free fall with no end in sight. A week later, Michael was living in a cheap pay-by-the-week motel on the outskirts of the city. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and disinfectant. His bespoke suits were gone, sold for a fraction of their worth to a consignment shop. His silver sports car had been repossessed. He spent his days in a fog of cheap whiskey, watching the ceiling, the same question echoing in the hollow chamber of his mind. Why he understood that Celestine was behind his ruin, but he couldn't grasp the scale of it, the sheer, ruthless efficiency of her revenge. The waitress he had discarded with $200 had returned as a corporate titan and dismantled his entire existence without ever speaking a single word to him. The sheer impossibility of it gnawed at his sanity. Then his phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Peterson, Ms. Duval will grant you a meeting. The Chartwell restaurant. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Be punctual." The Chartwell. It was the most exclusive, expensive restaurant in Westport. A place he had taken Brenda to celebrate his promotion, a place where a single meal cost more than a month's rent at this motel. The invitation was another calculated cruelty, a reminder of the world he had lost. But he knew he had to go. He needed answers. He needed to face her. He spent his last few dollars on a dry-cleaned shirt and trousers. When he arrived at the restaurant, the maître d', who had once greeted him by name, looked down his nose at him with disdain. "I have a reservation," Michael mumbled, feeling the eyes of the other patrons on him. "For Duval?" The name was magic. The maître d's expression changed instantly. "Of course, sir. Right this way." He was led to a secluded corner table with a panoramic view of the city lights, the very skyline Celestine was now reshaping. And there she was. She looked more beautiful than he had ever seen her. She wore a simple, elegant black dress. There was no ostentatious jewelry, just the quiet, unshakable confidence of a person completely in command of her world. She didn't rise as he approached. She simply watched him, her brown eyes giving nothing away. He sat down, his hands trembling slightly. A waiter instantly appeared to fill his water glass. "Celestine," he began, his voice hoarse. "I don't understand." "Don't you?" she replied, her voice calm and even. It was the first time she had spoken to him in over 4 years, and the sound of it, so devoid of the warmth he remembered, was like a shard of ice in his gut. "I think you do. You just don't want to accept it." She gestured for the waiter. "Would you like something to drink, Michael? I imagine you can't afford their scotch anymore." The casual cruelty of her words stung more than any shout. "Why are you doing this?" he pleaded. "To ruin me, was it all for this? To see me like this? Ruin you?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "Michael, you were ruined long before I came back. You were a hollow man, chasing a hollow dream. I didn't ruin you. I simply held up a mirror and forced you to look at your own reflection." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intensifying. "You threw me out into the street. Pregnant, you tossed $200 at me as if I were a piece of trash you were paying to have hauled away. You told me I was an anchor, a weight holding you back from your great destiny. You abandoned your own child without a second thought. I didn't know," he stammered. "I didn't know about your family, about the money. And that is your greatest failing," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet each word carried the force of a hammer blow. "You thought my worth was tied to my bank account. You assumed that because I was a waitress, because I lived in a small apartment and budgeted for groceries, that I was worthless. You saw my love, my support, my belief in you as having no value. You saw our unborn child as nothing more than a financial liability." She reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek, modern smartphone. She swiped the screen and placed it on the table, turning it to face him. On the screen was a photograph, a beautiful little boy about 4 years old, with Celestine's warm eyes and a smile that lit up his entire face. He was sitting on the shoulders of a handsome, silver-haired man, William Duval, in a sun-drenched garden, laughing with pure, uncomplicated joy. "His name is Liam," Celestine said, her voice softening for the first time, filled with a fierce maternal pride. He is brilliant and funny and kind. He loves to build things with his blocks. He thinks he can talk to dogs. He is the greatest joy in my life. He is your son." Michael stared at the picture, his breath catching in his throat. A son. A happy, thriving child who had no idea he even existed. The image of that laughing boy was a physical blow more painful than the loss of his career, his money, or his wife. It was the gaping, undeniable proof of what he had truly thrown away. It wasn't just an heiress and her fortune. It was a family. It was a life. "He is everything," Celestine continued, her voice regaining its steel. "And you are nothing to him. I did all of this for him, to create a world for him that you could never touch, to ensure that men with souls as bankrupt as yours could never harm him. This wasn't just about payback, Michael. It was about building a fortress. Your destruction was simply the quarry from which I sourced the stone." Tears streamed down Michael's face. The full crushing weight of his choices finally landed on him. He saw it all, his greed, his cruelty, his monumental stupidity. "Celestine, I'm sorry." He sobbed the words, pathetic and useless. "Please, let me see him. Let me try to be a father." Celestine slowly pulled the phone back, the image of his son disappearing. Her face was a mask of cold finality. "No," she said. The word was absolute. "You forfeited that right the night you slammed a door in the face of your pregnant wife. Liam has a family that adores him. He has love. He has stability. He has a grandfather who is teaching him about honor and integrity. He doesn't need a father, especially not one like you." She stood up, her movements fluid and graceful. She placed a few crisp $100 bills on the table. "For your meal," she said, echoing his own cruel gesture from years ago. "And a bit extra. It should cover you for a while. It's all I have for you." She turned and walked away, not looking back. Michael sat there utterly broken, amidst the clinking glasses and quiet chatter of a world he no longer belonged to. He was a ghost, haunted not by what he had lost, but by the irrefutable knowledge that he had willingly, arrogantly thrown it all away. In the end, Celestine's revenge wasn't a fiery inferno, but a quiet, creeping ice age that froze Michael Peterson out of the life he so desperately coveted. He became a cautionary tale, whispered among the city's elite. The last anyone heard, he was working a low-wage job in a different state, a gaunt, anonymous man crushed by the weight of his past. Brenda, having divorced him, eventually married a wealthier older man, continuing her life of transactional relationships. Celestine, however, did not dwell on the past. The empire she had built was not founded on vengeance, but on a vision for the future. Duval Tower, completed under her direct supervision, became an award-winning landmark, a symbol of innovation, and a testament to her strength. She continued to run CD Holdings with a blend of her grandfather's ruthless pragmatism and her own innate compassion, becoming one of the most respected and powerful figures in the industry. But her greatest success was not in the boardroom. It was in the sprawling gardens of the Duval estate, chasing after a laughing little boy named Liam. She had found her true purpose, not in tearing a man down, but in building a life of love, stability, and boundless opportunity for her son. She had once sought a simple life to be loved for who she was, and in a way, she had found it. Her life was now defined not by the Duval billions, but by bedtime stories, scraped knees, and the unconditional love of her child. She was no longer a runaway heiress or a scorned wife. She was simply a mother, and in that she found a wealth far greater than any fortune. She was the architect of her own life, and it was a masterpiece. The story of Celestine Duval is a powerful reminder that a person's true worth is never defined by their circumstances. It's a testament to the incredible strength that can be born from betrayal and the ultimate victory of living a successful, happy life. If her journey from heartbreak to triumph resonated with you, if you believe in the power of resilience and fighting for the life you deserve, then please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know this story moved. You share it with someone who might need to hear a message of strength, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll join a community that loves compelling stories like this, and you won't miss out on our next video. Thank you for listening, and remember to build your own fortress.